Thank you for joining us for today's virtual edition of the Geneva class of Stevens Valley Church, and we'll continue our study of Isaiah. We're going to be concentrating today on the significance of some very important prophecies, and one of them deals with Babylon. You might say, if you remember from a few weeks ago, we've seen Isaiah prophesying about the fall of Babylon. Well, he's going to do it again at this time. And that might seem a little confusing. Why doesn't he just give us all of the prophecies concerning one particular city at one particular location and time? But understand that these prophecies were delivered as sermons. They were delivered audibly, they were delivered in person, and they probably were collected at a later time by either Isaiah himself or some editor. Point is, they are all inspired. They're part of God's revelation to us, but we'll see portions of it delivered for the same subject at different times. So we'll see Babylon in our prophecy study today, as well as some other nations, and also Jerusalem. And that really gives a title for this particular broadcast. That is the Valley of Vision, because Valley of Vision is the title of an anthology of Puritan prayers that is well known and very popular, particularly in the Reformed community. So again, thank you for joining us as we look now to the prophet Isaiah. And we're going to be looking particularly at chapters 21 and 22 up to verse 14. Now, will be yet another prophecy before this particular section is ended, but there isn't time to devote to that today, and we'll put that off until next time. So 21 to 22:14, the prophecy of the wilderness of the sea, which refers to Babylon. We'll see the reason for that in a moment. The valley of vision, which pertains to Jerusalem, as well as prophecies against Edom and Arabia. So all of these, of course, in an area that relates to Jerusalem and the Holy Land. So first of all, let's look at a prophecy of these particular chapters, and I'm going to consider 21 through 23. As I said, we'll look at 23 in our study, Lord willing, next week. So 21 to 23 consists of prophetic oracles concerning various nations, emphasizing divine judgment and the sovereignty of God over all peoples. We've seen those particular points emphasized before. They will be emphasized throughout the book of Isaiah, which is why some people use the title the prophecy of ideas to describe Isaiah. So these chapters focus on the fall of powerful cities and kingdoms, warning of their demise due to sin, oppression, and pride. Sin, oppression, and pride. Again and again, outstanding reasons for God's judgment to come upon people. The overarching theme is that no nation, no matter how mighty, can stand against the plans of the Lord. So each chapter will present a different prophecy. Well, 21 actually has several oracles against Babylon, Edom, and Arabia. We'll see Edom under the name of Duma. And then in chapter 22, the judgment on Jerusalem, and chapter 23, a prophecy against Tyre. So the fall of Babylon, actually described a second time, verses 1 to 10 of chapter 21, the wilderness of the sea. The passage describes Babylon's destruction in apocalyptic terms. Babylon is one of the nations that was described as being destroyed, never to be built again. And when that happens, you may rest assured that is the case. Babylon, as Babylon, has never been reconstructed. So Babylon is referred to as the wilderness of the sea. And Isaiah envisions a dire scene where Babylon falls under the attack of the Medes and Persians. That's in verse 2 of 21. And that attack took place in 606 BC. The prophet is deeply disturbed. 21, 3 and 4. You'll see that he takes upon himself the burden of that destruction, and it symbolizes the severity of the judgment. And the famous phrase, Babylon is fallen in 21 verse 9, echoes later in Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 and 2, showing that Babylon becomes a symbol of worldly arrogance and idolatry. And I think in the book of Revelation, even Babylon symbolizes the worldly society. This is a map of the Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There was an earlier Babylonian Empire, and that was then succeeded by the Assyrians, and then the Neo-Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar. So if you'll notice, this is a rather large empire, and it encompasses here Israel, although the city of Jerusalem was never taken, but all the rest will fall to Babylon. So we begin to look at the prophecy, first of all, verses 1 to 5 in chapter 21. The oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea. As whirlwinds in the Negev sweep on, it comes from the wilderness, from a terrible land. A stern vision is told to me. The traitor betrays, and the destroyer destroys. Go up, O Elam. Lay siege, O Media. All the sighing she's caused, I bring to an end. Therefore my loins are filled with anguish. Pangs have seized me, like the pangs of a woman in labor. I'm bowed down so that I cannot hear. I am dismayed so that I cannot see. My heart staggers. Horror has appalled me. The twilight I longed for has been turned for me into trembling. They prepare the table. They spread the rugs. They eat. They drink. Arise, O princes, oil the shield. Let's stop just a moment at verse 5 and make some observations. Wilderness of the sea obviously refers to Babylon, and it may be a metaphor for the low elevation of the area, which is made swampy in areas by the river Euphrates and the various canals that flow into that river. The traitor and destroyer referred to, that you just heard in this section, it would be the Medes and the Persians. And this dismay and pain that we noticed may be, as I mentioned, the emotional reaction of Isaiah himself when he contemplates the utter devastation of the great Babylon. Not that he is a friend of Babylon, rather he sees Babylon as an enemy, but the very fact of this great, beautiful city and empire being completely destroyed was enough to evoke such a reaction. And at the end of the passage, you noticed the image of the preparation of a feast. And I think this may refer to the feasting of Belshazzar, which occurred at the time of the attack of the Medes and Persians, which is in one night brought down the empire. And that is described in Daniel chapter 6 and described quite accurately. And the final comment about princes oiling their shields, that was a practice that was done by the leaders, the commanders of an army, preparatory to the battle itself. They would oil their shields. Now, there's a parallel passage that I really think sheds some light on the one of Isaiah in Jeremiah 51, 12 to 13. Remember that Jeremiah is a prophet who comes somewhat later than Isaiah. He had Isaiah's prophecy at hand. He was familiar with it. And so he is really prophesying much of the same thing when he says in verse 12, set up a standard against the walls of Babylon, make the watch strong, set up watchmen, prepare the ambushes, for the Lord has planned and done what he spoke concerning the inhabitants of Babylon. O you who dwell by many waters, rich in treasures, your end has come. The thread of your life is cut. So you see Jeremiah referring to Babylon as dwelling by many waters. And again in chapter 50, verse 38, a sword against the Chaldeans, declares the Lord, and against the inhabitants of Babylon, a drought against her waters, that they may be dried up. For it is a land of images, and they are mad over idols. And we continue now this oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea, oracles concerning Babylon and its destruction in verses 6 through 10. For thus the Lord said to me, go set a watchman. Let him announce what he sees. When he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, let him listen diligently, very diligently. And then he who saw cried out, upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day, and at my post I am stationed whole nights. And behold, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. And he answered, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. O my threshed and winnowed one, what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I announce to you. Now, some observations on the last part of this prophecy. A watchman from Babylon would then see from his position in the watchtower, he would see the approaching Medo-Persian army coming with animals, which was characteristic of them. They usually brought with them a large number of different animals, and they would terrify their opponents, as well as these animals being used as beasts of burden. And he would notice that and announce it. And the complete destruction of Babylon is reflected symbolically in Revelation 18, verses 1 and 2, which reads, after this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. Now, the point about threshing suggests that God's judgment was carried out by Babylon, as God ordained Babylon as a powerful nation to thresh, but then Babylon itself would be threshed by the Medes and Persians. Let's come now to the second of the prophecies. Watchman, what of the night? We'll call this prophecy. It's just 2 verses in chapter 21. It's the oracle against Edom, here referred to by one of its cities, Duma. Duma, a region in Edom, is depicted as awaiting a word from God, asking, watchman, what of the night? Again, thinking of a watchman on a tower. But of course, there were watchmen stationed in all cities in ancient times to watch at the night, to be able to announce to the people, as they would inquire about the different watches of the night, first, second, third, and fourth, how goes the night? Are we safe? And then, of course, they could ask the watchman of questions. So the question is asked of this watchman. The response is ambiguous. Morning comes, but also night, which can be interpreted as a brief relief from suffering, but it would be followed immediately by further judgment. And this would suggest, ultimately, Edom's doom. It's inevitable, although it is delayed. Remember that Edom descended from Esau, the Edomites are descendants therefore of Esau, who was a brother of Jacob and son of Isaac. Now, this is perhaps an accurate picture of the location because there are many cities with that are named Duma, but Mount Seir is mentioned. That gives us a real anchoring point. And you see Edom adjacent to Mount Seir. So we would assume it's in this region, and this is south of Jerusalem, south of Moab and the Negev desert, and thus the wilderness of Sinai. So let's look at these 2 verses, the oracle concerning Duma. One is calling to me from Seir, watchman, what time of the night? Watchman, what time of the night? The watchman says, morning comes, and also the night. If you will inquire, come back again. Now, there was a person named Duma who was indeed the 6th son of Ishmael, Ishmael being son of Abraham. But the city of Duma was in the highlands of Judah between Hebron and Beersheba. Today, the city is known as Eldameh. And the scholars do believe, at least most scholars believe, that it refers to Edom, known at that time as Idumea. It probably refers to inquiries, this inquiring of the watchmen that would be made by prophets. And that is a good thing, that people would come to prophets and ask them rather than relying on their own strength or that of allies. So if the prophets, particularly from Jerusalem, are going to pronounce this prophecy, it's going to be one that does not give any consolation to Edom, because the eventual end of Edom is going to come. Now, let's make a few observations. There's a sense of urgency here. When is this night going to end? And it is asked from the standpoint of Jerusalem. There's a night of the danger of the invasion of these Assyrians. So we inquire of the watchman, when is the end coming? And the watchman comes back and says, the morning is coming, then the night. In other words, there'll be a brief respite in suffering, but the night's going to continue, and it's not a good message at all. Most scholars believe it's asked from the standpoint of Jerusalem, but it would apply to all of this region in Edom. So there's continual tribulation in this area. It's not free from it at any time. A tribulation that comes from Assyria and then comes to Babylon when Babylon conquers Assyria, and then comes from Persia when Persia conquers Babylon, then from the Greeks, and then from the Romans. And of course, the Romans are the ones who finally bring Jerusalem to an end. Now, there is a glimmer of light for the area during the Herodian period, because the Herodians allied themselves with the Romans, and they provided this respite, probably the respite that the watchman talks about as the morning coming, and then the night comes back. So there is no end of night for Edom, as it eventually will completely disappear. And that last part, if you're going to inquire, inquire. It's as though it's okay, you can come and inquire if you want, but you'll get the same answer and you'll be sent home. And to return again will simply not avail you any advantage. So let's move now to the third of these prophecies, rather dire prophecies. And this time from 13 to 17 in chapter 21, the judgment on Arabia. This prophecy targets Arabian tribes, particularly the Dedanites and Tema and Kedar. They will suffer displacement and war within a year. Now, if we are right in talking about 701 as the time that Sennacherib invaded, Sennacherib of Assyria, then it's going to be in that period of time. But within 1 year, these cities, these areas in Arabia will be displaced, and their once mighty warriors will dwindle because of divine judgment. Now, this is a map of Arabia as it appears today. And you see Mecca and Medina. Understand that this is now the capital area for the Muslim world. But prior to that, this is a map that is described by the cartographer as Arabia in Isaiah's time. And so you'll see Arabia in the brown shaded area. And you will notice there Kedar, the Dedanites, and you'll notice between them Tema. These are the three areas that are described in this prophecy. So here is the oracle in the evening concerning Arabia. The oracle concerning Arabia: in the thickets of Arabia you will lodge, O caravans of Dedanites. To the thirsty bring water. Meet the fugitive with bread, O inhabitants of the land of Tema, for they have fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, from the bent bow, from the press of battle. Thus the Lord said to me, within a year, according to the years of a hired worker, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end, and the remainder of the archers, of the mighty men of the sons of Kedar will be few, for the Lord, the God of Israel, has spoken. Now let's look back on that and try to make some observations to help us understand. The Dedanites descended from Dedan. Dedan was a son of Keturah, who was the second wife of Abraham. And Tema and Kedar, there were people at one time, but these cities are named for them and areas. They descended from the sons of Ishmael. And this area of Arabia, therefore, became a wall that protected Israel from the warlike tribes to the east, because invasions came characteristically from the east. And so Arabia came to be known as the burden of Arabia, that is, the protection that Arabia affords to Israel. And Kedar was noted for a particularly strong army, yet it is said within 1 year it's going to be driven back by this invading Assyrian army. I found an interesting paraphrase to this whole prophecy, put in words that are in prose, certainly. This is in the commentary by Kyle and Dalish, so I'll give it to you and help it. I think it helps us to understand what's going on. The trading caravans of the day, Dedanians, the mixed tribe of Cushites and Abrahamites, that is the sense of Abraham. This is a trading area in Arabia, very strong trading area. It was in the ancient times. So these Dedanites and the others that are there that dwell in the neighborhood of the Edomites, when on their way from east to west, possibly to Tyre, which is a trading center, would be obliged to camp in the wilderness, being driven out of the caravan road in consequence of the war, that is, the Assyrians coming into the area. And this war is spreading from north to south. So they're driven off of it. And the prophet, whose sympathy mingles with the revelation in this instance, also asks for water for the panting fugitives. They're driven back with fright toward the southeast as far as Tema, on the border of the Syrian desert, and about 3/4 of an hour from Duma. In the space of a year, nothing but a small remnant would be left of these heroic sons of Kedar and their bows. Now, with that, we'll move to chapter 22 and to the Valley of Vision. I again mentioned that the Valley of Vision is known certainly among Puritan scholars as a compilation of Puritan prayers. The theological theme of Isaiah 22 is a judgment on Jerusalem, and it highlights God's own people are not exempt from discipline. Their misplaced trust in human defenses rather than in God results in divine retribution. Now, valley, why would Jerusalem be called the Valley of Vision? Valley in the sense that Jerusalem is positioned like a valley surrounded by mountains all around it. So it is a lower area and can be seen in its entirety as a valley, although there were separate valleys within it. We'll look at that in a moment. A valley of vision, because Jerusalem had the advantage of prophets who revealed the will of the Lord to them. In other words, who gave them the vision of God's will. So, chapter 22, verses 1 to 14, is the judgment on Jerusalem. While the previous chapters addressed foreign nations, this chapter shifts to Jerusalem, the Valley of Vision, warning of impending judgment. Instead of repenting, Jerusalem's inhabitants respond to the crisis with feasting and revelry, as you'll see in verses 12 and 13. This attitude, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die, reflects a fatalistic arrogance rather than trust in God. Therefore, God declares this sin will not be atoned for, verse 14, showing that continued rebellion leads to irrevocable judgment from God. This is a map of the area of Jerusalem. It's not a particularly clear map, but you'll notice Jerusalem in the brown area, that's the city, and then all around it, the gray shaded areas would indicate the mountains that surround Jerusalem. Hence, you see Jerusalem as a valley between them. This is a clearer map and shows the general area with Jerusalem and the area of that in the brown, indicating the elevation. And of course, all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea, and the Negev to the south. So let's look at verses 1 to 4 with the oracle concerning the Valley of Vision, or Jerusalem. What do you mean that you've gone up, all of you, to the housetops, you who are full of shoutings, tumultuous city, exultant town? Your slain are not slain with the sword, or dead in battle. All your leaders have fled together. Without the bow, they were captured. All of you who are found were captured. though they had fled far away. Therefore I say, look away from me. Let me weep bitter tears. Do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of the daughter of my people. So again, the threat is from the invading armies of Sennacherib of Assyria, which occurred in 701 BC. Now they were slain, not with the sword, but the prophecy says with famine and fear. And the leaders, we're talking about the leaders of Judah, that region, fled to the city of Jerusalem, which of course is well fortified, thinking they'll be safe. They leave the unprotected cities of Judah to be captured by Sennacherib, which indeed happened. But Isaiah, and you'll see that lamenting at the end of the section, takes the burden of grief on himself and refuses to be comforted. That is an admirable trait on his part. He absorbs it within himself. These are my people, and they're suffering. So, continuing the vision from 5 to 11, the Lord has a day of tumult and trampling and confusion in the valley of vision, a battering down of walls and shouting to the mountains. And Elam bore the quiver with chariots and horsemen, and Kir uncovered the shield. Your choicest valleys were full of chariots, and the horsemen took their stand at the gates. He's taken away the covering of Judah. In that day you look to the weapons of the forest, of the house of the forest. And you saw that the breaches of the city of David were many. You collected the waters of the lower pool, and you counted the houses of Jerusalem, and you broke down the houses to fortify the wall. You made a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool, but you did not look to him who did it or see him who planned it long ago. Now, again, Jerusalem had valleys within it, and itself as a whole is considered as a valley, but the mountains surrounding it included the Mount of Olives and Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, where the temple was. Mount Zion is the citadel of Jerusalem. And then that would help define several individual valleys, such as the Valley of Kidron on the east, the Valley of Hinnom on a southeast angle to the city, the Valley of Gihon on the west, and the Valley of Jehoshaphat at the northeast. A comment by Kylan Dalich, just the significance of the valleys. A valley is a deep, still, solitary place, cut off and shut in by mountains. And interesting, the commentary notes that Isaiah's house was in the lower city. So Jerusalem is surrounded by Sennacherib's army, with her allies now defeated, and she is seemingly helpless. Now, they made all efforts possible to save the besieged city. You saw that in the prose section, that they were tearing down houses to help fortify the city. And even it mentions the house of the forest, which was built by Solomon, and at this time was used as an armory to store weapons and various military accoutrements. This Sennacherib's invasion occurred, as we said, in 701 BC. They tried to defend the city, but ultimately it was not their efforts. It was the answer of God's people to their prayers. God determined that Sennacherib would not take the city. But their attitude was, let's eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Let's see that in the poetry section. In that day, the Lord God of hosts called for weeping and mourning, for baldness and wearing sackcloth. And behold, joy and gladness, killing oxen and slaughtering sheep, eating flesh and drinking wine. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. The Lord of hosts has revealed himself in my ears. Surely this iniquity will not be atoned for until you die, says the Lord God of hosts. And you see what's happened. God had called for mourning and fasting in view of the impending danger, but the upper class of Jerusalem celebrated, apparently trying to deny that any danger existed, closing their eyes, and like we say, putting your head in the sand. And the motto of this denial was, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die, which is exactly the example of the people prior to Noah's time, when Noah preached that there was a flood coming and they ignored it. And of course, all of them died, save the people on the ark. Kylan Dalich comment that this statement indicates no pleasure in the thought of death, but in a love of life which scoffs at death, in which case the unalterable will of God is audibly and distinctly revealed to the prophet. Such scoffing as this, which defies the chastisement of God, will not be expiated in any other way than by the death of the scoffer, as you saw in the last lines of that prophecy. So that's one reason, again, that Isaiah's prophecy has been referred to as the prophecy of ideas. And because those ideas are eternal, they are very relevant to today, very meaningful to today, which is one reason that Isaiah is probably the most sought after and popular prophet among all the Old Testament prophets. So that brings us to the end of our study. And we'll turn next week, Lord willing, to the continuation of these prophecies. They will end at the end of chapter 23. We'll first consider prophecies involving Shibna and Eliakim, two of the administration of King Hezekiah in Jerusalem, one of them being condemned and one of them being elevated. But then the bulk of our study, most of it will be chapter 23, which will be a prophecy against Tyre. And I'd like for us to bring in Ezekiel's prophecy of Tyre as well to get a well-rounded view of God's will for this very important, very significant place that was a center of trade. So that'll be our next study. Again, I thank you for joining us. I hope you found this to be a blessing and to be profitable. And you will join us for our next study. And if you can, of course, come in person to the class. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.